Hello and welcome to our December Lunchbox Lecture. My name is John Long. I'm the Director of Education here at the National D-Day Memorial, and we are looking forward to a great presentation today from our speaker about a subject. You may not know the name Sergeant Richard Taylor yet, but if you're a D-Day buff, you probably know his work, and you'll understand that as we get into our presentation. But it is a pleasure to welcome our speaker, Jennifer Taylor Rossel, who is an occupational therapist, joining us from Trumbull, Connecticut, and she is the daughter of Sergeant Richard Taylor, who was an Army photographer for the Signal Corps and shot some of the most iconic footage. In fact, the only real video footage, motion picture footage of the D-Day invasion on Omaha Beach. And Jennifer has spent the last several years reviewing and organizing her father's photos and his documents to gain a better understanding of his role on that day and his feelings as to D-Day, as well as the importance of his photographic contributions from Normandy on to the liberation of Paris. So, as a result of these efforts, Jennifer has been recently subject of two different documentaries that highlight Sergeant Richard Taylor's historic work, and she'll talk about those in just a minute. She's also been interviewed by several publications, including Time Magazine, and very soon will be collaborating with the Victory Museum in Carentan, France, on an exhibit which features her father's footage and his World War II memorabilia. So again, you know the work that she's going to talk about. You just may never have realized where it came from, how it came to be. And so, again, Jennifer, thank you for joining us and looking forward to what you're going to tell us.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, John. I just want to thank the National D-Day Memorial Organization and again, John Long, for this opportunity to present my dad's contributions to D-Day. I also would especially like to thank Judy Slaughter, who found me by chance through my landline phone number and took a chance. And she was the one that was instrumental in setting up this connection that we have and resulting in this lecture today. So as everyone knows, my name is Jennifer Taylor Rossel. I am the daughter of Sergeant Richard Taylor, the only military cameraman who filmed what is now the iconic footage of the landing on Omaha Beach. This footage has been used in museums, documentaries, and films about World War II and D-Day. And I'm here today to share his story. My sister Pat and I came along late in my father's life. He was around 50. He was married twice before and had a daughter, Linda, with the second marriage. My mom shared very little about the war, nor did I ask her. She never encouraged my dad to share his war experiences with us. Though the war was rarely talked about, my dad's war experiences were woven into the fabric of my life. Souvenirs were scattered around our house. Photos of Paris were taken in 1945, hung on the walls. The story of his time in World War II would come out in bits and pieces. My dad would share his war experiences, usually when sitting at the kitchen table, having a drink after coming home late from work, or while my mom did the dinner dishes. It was then he would tell us, I filmed D-Day. I went in on the third wave. My film was used in movies about the war, as it was the only film that survived getting back to England. But he never shared any of the photos or film of D-Day. In the summer, when my dad would wear only an undershirt, I could see that there was a large dent in his upper left arm, which you can see on this slide. One time I asked him about it. He simply responded he was shot when landing on D-Day. He showed me the exit scar, which was so much smaller than the entry scar. And being about 6 or 7 years old at the time, I didn't really ask him anything more about it, nor did he volunteer. And I think that was probably the only time he spoke about his injury. And I just never asked him again about it. My dad came home from the war with 2 large cardboard boxes, which you can see in the slide, which contain many large 18 by 20 photos taken by other Signal Corps photographers, which again, you can see on the slide. From time to time, he would pull out the boxes and share the photos with us, again in the kitchen with us or with friends. He would point out things, never shying away from showing the grim details of the war, and then they would be put away. He told me these photos were part of an exhibition in Paris that was held at the end of the war. And my dad took them home with him as he asked the other Signal Corps photographers at the time if they wanted them, and they didn't want them. So he's like, I'll take them. So he did, and he came home, and we still have the original photos in the photo boxes. So in the early 1990s, my sister Pat and I helped our mom clear out our home. Our dad, in his early 90s by then, was suffering from dementia and could no longer communicate. As we started going through the boxes in the garage and in the house and everywhere, we discovered my dad had kept a significant amount of items from the war, much more than we had anticipated. And you can see these are some of the examples of his proof sheets. I have some negative film strips, and that's in a box. He had also, I have some of them printed up. So you see that on the right-hand side. Those are some of the prints I had made off of the negatives that are in that box. We also found bundles of letters in a large cardboard box that he had sent to his sister-in-law, Bobby Steele, in New York. They were tied up in string or shoelaces, and many were stored in the candy boxes he had received in care packages. And they seemed to be untouched until we found them. There were letters from his parents that were written in beautiful script, which took me a very long time to decipher. Letters from his sister, letters from fellow Signal Corps cameramen, and a slew of girlfriends and their mothers from the US, England, and France. But the best thing I found, which has helped me generate the recent interest in my dad's war contributions, were the letters Bobby Steele held on to. And they were carefully stapled and taped in an old binder, were my dad's letters that he wrote to her throughout the war, along with small mementos, photos, and newspaper clippings he had sent her. So at the end of the war, it seemed like she gave him the scrapbook back. And I wouldn't be here today telling his story and sharing it if it wasn't for her foresight to hold on to everything and then return them to my dad at the end of the war. And I'm forever grateful for her for doing that. When I started looking at the letters, everything was just as she had placed it. It had never been touched. And in these letters, he was very candid about what was going on with the war. He spoke of his dreams after the war, his hopes people would not forget him if he died, his anger at the Nazis, the uncertainty of who to trust when they were out filming, and the sounds of battle, and him dealing with being out there shooting. His worry about also making it through. Most significantly, his thoughts the night before D-Day, D-Day itself, and every day after until he came home. And these are all the letters, and I still have yet to go through. I've gone through a lot of them, but I still probably have about another 50 to 70, I think, more to go through. So the amount of war material he kept was indicative of the profound impact it had on him. But despite all this, he shared very little about his experience with my sister and I. And as a history enthusiast, I volunteered to sort through his items, much to my husband's dismay, as he wanted me to donate it all. But there was also another reason I took on this project. My relationship with my dad was a challenging one. He was tough and a critical father, which made it very difficult for me to connect with him. And his war experiences remained largely unspoken, which I have since learned is very typical for many World War II veterans. However, this collection of war materials provided for me a chance to understand just who this man, my father, was, and to find some peace with our relationship. So in the early 2000s, I began organizing his materials, which was an overwhelming emotional process. Each piece was a fragment of a larger story, and slowly as I organized them, a fascinating narrative began to unfold. I was actually able to construct a timeline of his life. He was born of English immigrants in the United States on February 22nd, 1907. His full name is Richard Albert Washington Taylor, and he was named Washington because his parents loved America, and he was born on President Washington's birthday. So I remember him telling me stories of his boyhood. He left school at 15 with only a 9th grade education. He never went back to get his GED. He took on a newspaper route to help out both his mom, who is now divorced from his dad, and his sister. He admitted to my sister and I that he was pretty wild growing up then. He drank, he smoked, he broke the rules, he stole, and was often in trouble. I found, when we were going through the things, many photos of friends, both male and female. And from what I can tell from the photos, he was apparently very well liked by women. At the age of 18, he apprenticed himself at a local but prosperous photo studio in the Tampa, St. Petersburg area in Florida. And that's where I surmised his love of photography blossomed. But unfortunately, times became tough and he was laid off. And so at this time, he was around 21. So that was probably around 1928. So he told me stories of how he hitched rides on trains to get himself to New York City to find some work. And there he does find work and finally ends up being eventually hired by a studio called Van Damme Studios. And they were the ones that photographed the shows and the stars of Broadway theater. They would go in and shoot the rehearsals, and my dad would also do their actors' portraits and whatever else was asked. So he ends up staying there until the war happens, and in the meantime, he also gets married. So by 1942, his marriage ended in divorce. So he decides that he's going to enlist. And he details in a letter to Bobby Steele, he writes of going down to the Grand Central induction station in New York City on December 7th, 1942, which was on the anniversary of Pearl Harbor. So he went down there armed with reference letters from his business for where he had worked. He had a letter from his landlord, all attesting to his good work ethic and that he was a good tenant. He documents this at 11 o'clock in the morning as a photographer in the Army Signal Corps photographic unit. He had just made the cutoff, which was at that time was the age of 35 by a mere 2 months. He would have turned 36 in February of 1943. So in one of the letters he wrote to Bobby, he expressed his fatigue with being a studio photographer for 17 years, and he craved change and excitement. And I also believe that this was an opportunity for him to earn some regular pay as he was helping out his father at this time. He also could acquire new photographic skills and have access to the latest photographic equipment, which my father adored getting any kind of new camera or gadget. And he always had new cameras and gadgets at the house. So, and of course, I think he also wanted to be part of the war effort. And I think this is the way that he could contribute. So at this point, he was a pretty seasoned and experienced and a very confident photographer. And obviously the Army welcomed him, recognizing their need for skilled photographers and cameramen as they intended to document the war. So in my research and conversations that I've had with various historians, I have learned since that both Eisenhower and Roosevelt were committed to having a photographic record of the war. They wanted to show the families back at home what was happening. They wanted them to gain the family support, and also to provide a glimpse into the realities of war while also maintaining a record for the Army. So my dad goes off for basic training at various military camps on the East Coast, including Long Island. However, the interesting piece to this whole thing is that he almost did not become a war photographer. So due to a snafu, he is sent to Boston to be a longshoreman on the docks. He's sent in June of 1943 under the Transmission and Communication Battalion. And he starts off as a longshoreman on the docks, and then he moves over to a driver. And it was all because his occupation that he had listed when he filled out his enlistment papers was photographer. And they had put him under the category of craftsman in the Signal Corps. So my dad is obviously not happy about this. So he ends up going to both the commanding officer in Boston as well as Long Island. He gets a leave and he goes down to Long Island, and he goes on to request a transfer. And and he's very persistent, and he does. After 2.5 months, he gets a transfer back to Long Island to where one of the photographic units of the Signal Corps is based, because he's like, look, I'm a photographer. You don't want me doing this, and you really need my skills. And the Army did need, as I said, seasoned photographers. So this is where he learned how to use the 35 millimeter IMO, which is what he used to film the Omaha landing. So at the end of the training, which is probably around, I think, September or so, he is sent to Texas to join a photographic group. And the photographic group is known as the 165. And I have since learned, little did they know that the 165 would go on to film and photograph many of the iconic battles and events of World War II, both in the ETO and over. There was a group that went over to the Pacific. So on Thanksgiving evening, which was November 25th, 1943, my dad and the others boarded a ship called the Louis Pasteur in New York City, bound for Liverpool, England. He wrote in a letter to Bobby that they departed the next morning, which would be November 26th, with no convoy, with 4,500 white and African-American troops. He tells that the ship zigzagged to avoid the subs in the area. So it would zigzag during the day and be slow. And then in the evening, it would speed up and try to make up time. They arrived on December 4th, which ironically is today, with an escort of British Catalina planes. He wrote in his letters that the food was atrocious. It tasted almost like swill. They slept like sardines, feet in each other's faces. The ship constantly pitched and rolled, especially in the last few days. A lot of people got sick from seasickness and other illnesses. So they arrive in England, and they're immediately sent to Chipping Salisbury, where he and the others prepare for the invasion. The photo on the bottom left is taken by somebody, Yanks in Bristol, who has a website about the Army setting up everything in England, and has done a piece on my dad. And then my dad did find time to go sightseeing, so this is just one of his photos that he took. He was embedded with the 1st Infantry Division. They were experienced soldiers, and he was happy about being in that. And I'll just give you a couple seconds so that you can read the excerpt that he wrote to Bobby about that. Okay. At this point, my dad's tale of filming D-Day was just an unsubstantiated story. I had his orders, as you can see here, that he received, that he held on to. I also have as I said, the letters that he wrote about being involved in D-Day and his story himself. So in the meantime, I was doing a lot of research online, trying to find his films and any information. I tried the National Archives, but I could not figure out how to navigate the system. I had such a hard time. I reached out to various World War II related places to see if they were interested in my dad's story and his collection and if they could possibly help me. But unfortunately, no one was interested. So I was kind of stuck. And then, as we all know, COVID hit. So after that, I just kind of put what I had completed aside and wondered if I would ever find someone who would be interested in my father's story. And then in August of 2022, something happened. I received a DM through Facebook from a Joey Van Meesen, who is a World War II researcher who lives in the Netherlands and runs a YouTube channel called Snafu Docs. He simply wrote, "Are you Sergeant Richard Taylor's daughter?" And I answered yes. So he told me he was doing a documentary of my dad's film contribution of D-Day. He said my dad's films were iconic and are used anytime there's a reference to D-Day and Omaha Beach. And I was shocked to learn that. He asked if I had anything he could use in the documentary. And I said I probably could help him. So he put together this documentary of my dad's film using the materials I provided him. So here's the trailer. I'm going to try to play it from here. And if not, John's going to have it run. So we'll see if it works.
I got a slight wound in the left arm on the morning of D-Day in France. There's nothing to worry about really, Dad, as my arm will be the same as before in another week or two. Managed to get some good photos, so I was told before leaving France.
So since the release of this documentary, which was released in June of 2023, it's had more than 10 million views and has resulted in subsequent documentaries and articles on my dad and I. On the night of June 5th, my dad departs Great Weymouth Rail Pier at night on the British ship, the Anvil. And an excerpt from a letter he wrote on July 22nd, 1944, to Bobby. He writes, "That's funny about having that fear you mentioned between 11 and 12 o'clock, night of June 5th. At that time, I was tossing and turning in bunk aboard an English troop ship, knowing by 3 a.m. we would be in little boats, LCAs, headed for Normandy Beach. I just couldn't sleep, kept thinking of you, Jack, Mom, Dot, and my family. The fun and good times we all spent together on different occasions. Yes, and even the rough times. Read my Bible, but couldn't concentrate as you and family would bob up in my mind. Wondered if anyone back there thought in the next 6 or 7 hours, hell would break loose, hurtling in the long-awaited second front. Tried to tell you via thought waves, but it seemed there was an invisible wall against me." And here's the film my dad made of D-Day that was shared with me, and this has come from NARA. So I cried, obviously, when I saw this. After all these years, I had finally saw his film that he had told me about so long ago. As you can see, it's short because he was unable to continue filming once he hit the water. The rolls were spliced together, so as I said, it's a bit out of order. And once he had made land, he had to run for the cliffs for protection, which was from the snipers, which they all were doing. And at one point, if you're looking at the video, you can see there's on the boat as they're coming in, you can see one man climbing over the side, and he was just throwing up because the seas were so rough that morning. And here are some stills that he also took that day. You can see that the men are all gathered under the cliffs. The picture on the left, I was told that this is one of the sailors who was operating one of the LCAs and ended up on Omaha Beach because his boat had sunk. And here's another photo. And whenever I look at this photo, what comes to mind is the thought of just what they saw that day. And they look so young and just totally stunned with what has just happened. So the reason my dad's film survived was because my dad was pretty stubborn. And this is what he told me. At the end of June 6th, an officer came up to him and said that he would take the films, that he was tasked with bringing the films back to England to be developed. And my dad said, absolutely not. These are my films. This is my work. I will take them myself and deliver them. And since he was wounded, because he was shot just as he went into the landing on D-Day, he was shot coming in and had taken some shrapnel. And so they said, okay, you can go back. And he was sent back to England and to be treated, and he was allowed to take his films with him. And then the films were handed over at the hospital. So my dad, being very meticulous, requested and was given a receipt for the films to show that as proof that he had done his job. So as a result, his footage that was taken that day on Omaha Beach was in the news of the day, newsreel that was shown around the country. And as a result, his sister and family members were able to see his work. Time magazine did an article on it and mentioned him. Popular Mechanics and Yanks magazine all wrote about his D-Day film work. And then obviously portions of his film were also included with other D-Day films, and they were sent to President Roosevelt for him to review. The camera he used was a Bell & Howell 35 IMO, and it weighs about 30 pounds. And I did have an opportunity last year to see one and pick it up, and it is very heavy. And I just can't imagine how my dad was able to manage carrying this camera. He had film canisters on him, a still camera, a gun, and all without getting the equipment wet while wearing a flak jacket and wading through the freezing water to shore while getting strafed. And he also got shot pretty much as soon as he got off the boat. So I'm just amazed that he was able to do it. And I have, here's just a little snippet of what the camera sounded like, so you have an idea of what it looks like when it was operating and what it sounds like. So in a letter he wrote home through Vmail while at the hospital, he, you can see it up there on the screen. He writes about his injury, but he doesn't really dwell on it at all. He appeared to be in good spirits as he included a comment on the attention he was receiving from the charming American nurses. In another letter he wrote to Bobby, my dad provided more details about his injury, the when, the where on his body, and how he was shot and how he was feeling since the injury. And this is a photo of him taken at the hospital. And he said in his letter that he was wounded by a piece of shrapnel, 1 inch by 1/2 inch, which went through the muscle of his upper left arm above the stripes, just missing the bone. And it came from a rear. They think maybe an M88 hitting one of the telemines or hitting the boat, and then a just piece fracturing off and hitting him. So you can see that was a pretty large entry wound that I showed you earlier on the slide, and he had a pretty large scar. So in early July, my dad returns to France. He joins the 165 and he lands once again on Omaha Beach before heading off to film. And this is a photo he took when he got back to Omaha Beach to France. So in June of 2024, my husband and I had an opportunity to go on a biking trip, and we went to Normandy, France. And I have to say, I've gone from not knowing anything of my dad's film work to seeing scenes of his film everywhere we went in Normandy. And the slide here shows me with the owner of a small museum near Omaha Beach. It's a small private museum. And I was invited there to visit while we were over in France. And so there on the side of the museum building is a scene from my dad's film. So this is a view from the top of the WN-60, one of the sniper nests close to where my dad landed on June 6th. And I have an arrow. So based on what I was told, his boat was pushed further away from the targeted landing spot. So instead of where they were hoping to get closer to the cliffs, they landed on open beach. So consequently, he had to run from the open beach towards the cliffs as it was the only area that offered protection. So you can see from this picture how the men were so exposed to the Nazis upon landing. And again, I'm just amazed that he was able to carry all that equipment despite getting shot and make it safely to the cliffs. I returned again this past February to take part in another documentary on my dad. So here are some pictures I took. On the left is a view of Omaha Beach in February, and looking up towards Utah Beach. And then there's a view of the cliffs where my dad ended up. And this is where I feel the closest to my dad. I now have such a better understanding of what he and the others went through, and what an unbelievable thing he accomplished. This is a close-up of the area where my dad filmed the footage you saw earlier. And many of you might recognize our guide, who's Florent Plana. He is also featured in Joey Van Miesen's documentary on my dad that I shared earlier. So it is certainly a different place than it was 80 plus years ago. And here's a slide I took of the American Cemetery at Omaha. As I said earlier, Joey Van Miesen's video has generated recent interest in my dad's story. This is a 2-part documentary film that was made by a French company that my dad and I are in. It is called Inside D-Day, Filmmakers on the Front Lines. It was released in June of 2024. It features 4 people. One is Jack Lieb, who's a war correspondent that happened to, who went in, I think, around Utah Beach, happened to have a camera, and so did a lot of footage and film, and had color, and was also wrote articles. So he's featured. Then there's George Stevens, and John Ford. And then they also picked my dad because he was the only one that had done the filming on Omaha Beach. So as I said, it's been seen across Europe, but unfortunately it has yet to be released here in the US. And this is the latest project on my dad that was just released this past June, which is why I was there in February. It was made by another French company called Targo, and it's run by two dynamic filmmakers. They specialize in immersive media using AI and Apple Vision Pro goggles to provide an immersive experience. So their documentary puts you right on at Omaha Beach on June 6th, and as well as present day. It is an incredible experience. I had the opportunity, my husband and I, to try it. You can review the trailer to get a taste of it and see what they've done. And it was a finalist in the immersive media category for both the Emmys and at the Venice Film Festival this year. So as I said, after being treated for his wounds that he received on D-Day, my dad returned to Europe and filmed for a few more months until he just couldn't do it anymore. So in January of 1945, he requested a transfer to Paris to process, label, and censor the photos and films coming in from the front. In a letter he wrote to Bobby, he wrote he was done. He could not do it anymore. Felt there was a bullet with his name on it. The rest of the 165 went to Germany and on to Berlin, and he stayed back. He gave up becoming a lieutenant as a result. So this is a photo my dad took, and there's I'm going to have share a few more of my dad also took that were taken in and around Paris. So my dad, Sergeant Richard Taylor, served in the Army from 1942 to 1945. From 1944 to 1945, he was in the ETO. And these are the battles and the events he took part in them. He participated in D-Day landing on Omaha Beach. He filmed the liberation of Paris. He filmed the liberation of Luxembourg. He was filming parts of the Hurricane Forest battles. He filmed a lot for the Battle of the Bulge, and he also filmed the Malmedy Massacre. He was awarded the Purple Heart, the Silver Star, the Victory Medal, Sharpshooter Medal, American Service Medal, European, African, Middle Eastern Service Medal, Bronze Arrowhead, and the Good Conduct Medal. And though my mom displayed my dad's Purple Heart, my dad never spoke about receiving these medals, nor did I ever see them until we went through his war materials. So after the war, he came home and settled in New Jersey. He married a second time. He became a self-employed freelance photographer in New York City, specializing in antiques. I asked him once why he did antiques and not people. He said that he was not a very good photographer of people, which I find that very interesting given what he was doing. He got divorced, and then he married my mom. So my dad passed away at the age of 95. Once again, I want to express my gratitude for this remarkable opportunity to share my father's story today. So while this presentation focused on my dad and my quest for closure with him, it is also for the other photographers whose names may have been forgotten. It was these individuals who wielded cameras instead of rifles. They bravely risked their lives to expose the realities of war and to bring these stories to the public. And like the soldiers of World War II, they too were witnesses to unimaginable horrors and inhumanity. And they were the ones who recorded it all for us to remember and to never forget. And that is my presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. What an interesting story. What a good job you have done in
Thank you.
serving your father's legacy and putting a a name and a face to the footage that, again, if you're a D-Day buff, you've seen a lot of this. So this is great. Now, if you have a question for Jennifer, you can put it into the comment feature or the Q&A feature, whatever you're using to watch this. But put that in, and we'll pass them on. But let me point out one name very quickly. I know you and I have discussed it, but there is one member of the 165th Signal Photo Corps Company on our wall because he died on D-Day. His name was Kegum Nagosian.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He was going, I think it was still, I don't know that he had a motion picture. I think it was a still
Photographer.
Yeah. But he was going to Pointe du Hoc with the Rangers, and his
Yes.
craft sunk. So he and several members of that LCA were lost at the time. But he as far as I know, never got to take a picture. If he took a picture, of course, they were lost. When his camera was lost. But we always, we exist to memorialize the people who fell on D-Day, and so just wanted to throw his name out there.
Right. I was just going to say, in terms of for him, I know you and I had talked about it. Joey Van Meesen did do another documentary that's on a Snafu YouTube that talks about the other photographers that went on that day. My dad has just his, but then he did another one of those that were at Pointe du Hoc. He does mention him that he felt that those two did not make it at all to even make any film work that day, that they had gotten hit. So there is Joey has done that was released, I think, last year, a video on that features him in it.
Excellent. And I've not met Joey, know his name, but Laurent Flo is a good friend of the memorial. His wife, Jenny Post, used to work here. And so we have a great relationship with them and through, with Joey through them. So thank them also for all their hard work. And we have a one comment that's come in. Always interesting to look into a soldier's history. Part of a history archive team of the South Nottinghamshire Hussars.
Oh.
World War up to World War II. So very interesting. That's a lot of history buffs out there. And, their interest and participation in the reenactments and such. So don't see any other. We have a small studio audience. Did you have a question?
On his second trip in, was Paris the last stop?
No, Paris was not his last stop. As I said, when he came into at Omaha, he was in and around the Normandy area. I was told, and based on the letters, and there's a French historian, he embedded with the French army for a little bit, and I showed a film reel. He asked for and received two 60 millimeter film reels. One of them, I had them, Targo digitized them for me. One of them was completely shot. It was just too dried and crinkled and they couldn't do anything. The other one, they were able to, and I have it on my computer. And so he did film the Liberation of Paris. I also have film strips that show it. And then from Liberation of Paris, he writes extent about a very interesting letter about what it was like to be in Luxembourg and what was going on. And they were tasked with taking out the big transmitter in Luxembourg because they wanted to knock it out so the Nazis couldn't use it. And as a result, it was a very interesting story. And then from there, he was in and out of Bastogne. He was Ardennes, St. Vith, Erline. He was in and out there because the photographers, the cameramen, you had a cameraman, a still photographer, and a driver. And the cameraman kind of called the shots. And what they did, I may be talking too much, but what they did was they had an order. They were given an order and said, okay, we need this, this, and this. We need to see this. We need to see this. And they would take it and they would just go, and they could go anywhere they wanted. They had unlimited access to anything. The only thing they had to memorize, they had to know all the different, military. They had to know all the different patches. They had to memorize the roads. They had to know, who was, the Nazis, who weren't, because they could not have any maps on them if they should get caught. And my dad wrote that they were often the first ones that went into a village. And sometimes it was great and wonderful to see. They would come out, so happy to see him. And other times he said, you knew that the Nazis had just left because there was a lot of death and destruction.
Well, very good. We had a comment coming in from Judy Slaughter, daughter-in-law of our founder, Bob Slaughter, D-Day veteran. But Judy, if you're listening, your message, it was cut off, the first part of the sentence. So if you can kind of resubmit it, because we only got, looks like, the second half of a comment. But in the meantime, while we see if Judy's able to redo that, let me ask about the Malmedy massacre. You mentioned that your dad did some photo documentation of that. Have you seen that footage, or was it still photos?
Okay, what was that again? I missed the first part. Sorry.
The Malmedy massacre. You mentioned that.
Yes,
Yep.
I have. Actually, I have still photos. I don't have it on his film reel, but I do have two still photos, and I have, again, Joey and I have kind of gone back and forth on a lot of things, and he did something on the Malmedy massacre, and I sent him a picture. So I have a couple stills. He writes that he was tasked with filming it, and then he was on the list to be called to bear witness when they did a trial with the Nazis who they had captured.
I can imagine how difficult that would be, because that was, obviously just a very horrendous, crime that was committed there. And
right. Right.
I have followed that very closely, because, of course, Bedford had very high per capita losses on D-Day. That's why the memorial is here. But there were 2 Bedford soldiers lost in the Malmedy massacre as well, and one Bedford soldier who was injured but survived. So again, a kind of a local story that comes home. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate the work your father did to, give a visual, element to this history that so absorbs us here.
Right. And the thing is, I've been able to now start to link photos. I have lots and lots and lots of photos, and I'm starting to, as I finish going through the letters, I'm kind of able to link the letters, because he wasn't able to detail where he was, but he gives enough of a story to either his film reels that I have, the film reel I have, or some of the photographs. So you have the photograph, but then I have kind of the backstory of kind of, again, his thoughts and feelings of what he was going through and what was happening. And he was hoping he would not be called for the Malmedy trials. He did not want to go testify, but he knew he would have to do it. An interesting side note, before he even came back to Omaha Beach, when the hospital found out he was a photographer, a cameraman, they asked him to go film some of their surgeries, because they were doing a lot of cutting edge, no pun intended, surgeries at that time, because they had such terrible wounds. So they asked him to film, and he writes about filming that and how gory and awful it was. But he did film it for them, for the American, for the medical corps.
Oh, very good. And we forget that, because we live in such a video age. Everything we can see immediately, news events or some happening across the globe. It's only minutes before we're looking at video of it live. We forget how groundbreaking this really was in World War II. Judy was able to send in her comments a little farther. She says, as a former teacher, I know students learn differently. That's why having video as well as still photos.
Thank you.
Learning
I
different.
think that's helpful for myself as well.
Yes, well, all of us. And again, it was such groundbreaking. We can see this footage of World War II. We can't see it of, say, the Revolutionary War.
No,
So,
and that's right.
that's
Even World
Yeah.
War One. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So again, thank you for your work on this, and I know you're not done. So as you come up with other conclusions and new discoveries, please keep in touch because we are fascinated by this. In the meantime, I encourage our listeners, watchers, as if you get the opportunity to look at the Snafu film online and other things, and keep a watch out for your exhibit coming up in France.
Okay, thank you.
That opens? Do you know when that opens?
I'm still in talks with him about it. We're supposed to be Flo is supposed to be in on that meeting with me because we've got to figure out, I need somebody to represent me over there in Caratal and handle the materials that we have. I have set up an LLC for this, but I just don't know quite how we're going to work it. So I'm waiting to hear back from them. So they're hoping to do an exhibit in April of 2026 and be there for probably a couple of years. And I am also, there's a museum, the Liberation of Paris Museum, and then there's another Omaha museum that's also expressed interest through a French historian. So that may be coming up in 2028 or 29, because in 2029 is the 75th, and not 75th, sorry, 85th anniversary of D-Day. So
Excellent. So we'll look forward to that. And in the meantime, encourage all of our listeners and watchers, come by, see the memorial if you haven't been here in a while, and keep following our social media and our webpage for upcoming events and announcements about things. We have a big year planned because 2026 is the 25th anniversary of the opening of the memorial. And Jennifer, I hope you will certainly keep us updated on what you discover and with new revelations that you get from your father's work. And thank you very much for this presentation today. Excuse me, and for the work you're doing and kind of keep history alive.
Well, again, thank you very, very much, both you and Judy Slaughter, for actually inviting me to come and speak to through your D-Day memorial. It was a great opportunity. As I said, I hope everybody got something out of it, and it was my pleasure. I really, it's just been nice to share his story because she did do a lot, and it was a very interesting one. I didn't think it would be, but it is.
Well, again, thank you all for joining us today, and keep a watch out for our other upcoming events. And in the meantime, from the National D-Day Memorial, we'll say thank you and wish you happy holidays coming up.
All right. Thank you.